Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome y'all to the House Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee meeting. We've got several items on our agenda today. First, before any of our members have to skate away, for those of y'all who have not responded to Misty, we have a committee dinner tomorrow night. And any of y'all who would like to, they do plan on being there with your spouse or guest, if you would please touch base with Misty where we can get a head count. We have several hosts that are going out of their way to be gracious enough to host this committee dinner. And we'd like to at least always try to get a semblance of how many people will be there. So getting that out of the way. We got several bills up. First bill I'm going to call up would be Senate Bill 141. Does everybody? Everybody has the bill. You should have several bills. You should have Senate Bill 141. You should have Senate Bill 76. You should have a substitute to H.R. 724. And you should have House Resolution 744 under consideration today. Senator, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. We give an opportunity to bring Senate Bill 141. There was unintended consequences from the passage of House Bill 60 and House Bill 826 last year. This language in Senate Bill 141 is language that had been on the books for 6 years. It was a bill that was originally signed into law by Governor Sonny Perdue. And what it does is for those kids who have minor weapons violations, it gives them a second bite at the apple, if you will. This particular legislation has kept a lot of kids for those minor weapons violations in school from going to youth detention centers and really being sent through the juvenile justice system. Back 6 years ago, when I passed this legislation, there was a lot of talk about a kid up in Morgan County who inspired me to write, who had a little 2.5-inch fishing knife in a fishing village, and it happened to fall out of his back pocket, and after he turned it in, he still was sent through a youth detention center and sent through the judicial process. And after hearing his mother share that story with me, I got really inspired, which gave forth to the original passage of this language. This bill simply puts that language that was on the books back 6 years ago that has saved a lot of kids from going through youth detention centers back on the books again. That's in Section 1. Section 2 includes, for those cases that this code section pertains to, that it also allows the teachers not to report those violations for those kids who have those minor infractions with weapons in the classroom. And Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'll be more than glad to entertain them, please.
Mr. Jaspers.
Senator Jones, thank you for working on this. I know we've all tried to look at 826 and 60 and find out all the different combinations to fix, especially this issue. I know Representative Setzler worked on it very hard.
Yes.
Also, but one thing I noticed when I was looking over this morning, this is in the juvenile code, is it not?
That's correct.
True. So knowing that so that any offender, unfortunate, that had one of these minor weapons that you're describing, if they're 17 or over, they would still be subject to the severe penalty. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
I guess I've been working on this also, because it's heavy on my heart, like I know it is yours, because I'm the author of 60. And I've kind of worked through a similar thing in what I've got in House Bill 492. And I don't know if you'd be like me, let me show you what I've done here, if you'd be amenable to letting me sub 492 onto yours, because mine takes care of the kid no matter how old they are, and if they're in a school safety zone. And I think that's what we want, because we're changing the starting date of these kids. So I'm going to have, as you do in your county, lots of 17 and 18-year-olds who are seniors, which we didn't, there's not many now, but I think we're going to really increase that number. And I kind of trying to make sure if we fix something, Senator, we fix it.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if I'd love to, if we could kind of put you on hold for a while and you and I meet and just let me show you what I've got.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, that would be appropriate.
That'd be fine. We have one other question first. 25 of them, Mr. Beecher.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, just a question. You just gave a vignette of a story in Morgan County and mentioned a 2.5-inch knife. This alludes here to a weapon in the code section where it's defined. It mentions any blade over 2 inches. So if it were 2.5 inches, it would still be, that would be, in fact, a weapon currently. Okay, I just wanted to make sure where that cutoff was. So
Absolutely.
That is accurate.
But under this particular legislation, like with that kid where it just inadvertently fell out of his pocket, he would not be
Gotcha.
arrested and sent through the juvenile justice system because there was no intention of doing anyone any harm.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Number 12, would that be Ms. Frazier?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Jones, in this legislation, will it take care of, there is an age limit?
That is correct. This is the juvenile code section.
Juvenile code, okay. All right, I'll wait until you all combine the bills. I did have a question because I'm concerned about children as small as pre-Kers that unintentionally bring weapons in that they shouldn't.
Okay.
So I'll wait until you merge the legislations together and ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier. Senator, if you don't mind, we're going to let Representative Jaspers get his substitute ready. And you feel free if you want to stay, if you have another committee to go to or something like that, because we're going to move this to the end of the agenda and take care of a few other issues.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
And if it suits. All right, that'll be fine. All right. Let's get a couple of the resolutions out of the way, because I got a feeling that Mr. Senator Jackson has asked would we designate retired Senator Brush to handle his, so we're going to handle a couple of these other issues first. We have a substitute to H.R. 724. Representative Pack. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I believe it's my first time appearing before public safety. Maybe not. I bring before you for consideration a substitute to H.R. 724. I'm working off of LC 213830S. This resolution simply seeks to create a House study committee on two general issues. One is the cybersecurity, and second is privacy. And I categorize privacy as data protection, which oftentimes is linked to cybersecurity breaches of entities and government entities that compile or store private personal identifying information of customers and users of their services. Basically, if you look at some of the whereas and some findings, I combine some of the resolutions that went through that kind of stalled in both houses, and I put them in three categories. Just by way of background, I want to let you know that this issue kind of came to be an interest of mine. In my prior life, before I came out to private practice, I actually handled a lot of breach and cybercrime issues when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. What I realized is that our laws, especially in the federal and also international treaties and even the state laws, were not adequate to keep up with some of the technology that was changing. As a result, you'll very rarely see a cybercrime prosecution, particularly because of the extra-jurisdictional nature of the crime. For example, a lot of the identity thieves who trade in stolen identities are generally based off of based out of countries outside of the U.S. Jurisdiction, and they bounce off several different computers. So gathering evidence to prosecute those individuals is very, very tough. You'll see once in a while prosecutions of individuals who are based in the United States, and they kind of screw up. They're low-end kind of cybercrime criminals. So I've had a passion to try to catch up our laws to accommodate for continuing cyber crimes. As you know, I'm sure if you were a victim of identity fraud or a victim of a data breach where your personal identifying information was taken or released, that you're probably wondering, you may have gotten a letter or an email saying that your data was compromised. But what you don't know is that there's a hodgepodge of laws right now dealing with how to send notifications to you that your data has been compromised, and there's really, especially in Georgia, there's really no recourse for you for those breaches. Last time this body had taken a looked at this issue was back in 2007. In 2005, there was a Personal Information Protection Act passed by the General Assembly. In 2007, that extended to not just the governmental entities, but also to information brokers, meaning third-party companies that actually house and collect and sell data. So in other words, Equifax and those type of companies. A lot of the states are now moving to large corporations for requiring them to notify you if your information has been breached. The most common one you might have seen locally here is Home Depot. If your information has been breached, if you use a credit card at Home Depot and they had a massive breach, you might have gotten an email. I received such an email. I don't know if you have or not. And they might have offered to buy you LifeLock for a couple months. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think many people know whether or not what happens to your information. One of the problems, obviously, is that there's no central repository to report any kind of breaches. So if you're not checking that email anymore or you don't get that letter, you never know that your information has been stolen. What generally happens when there's a data breach like this, someone usually steals that information and sells it in the black market overseas. And they trade in currency not in the banking system. And so your data must be out there, and it gets sold, and credit cards and other types of lines of credit are opened up. So this is a big problem. As a result, I would propose that the House study this issue to see how our laws are at this point, and to recommend any further laws or regulatory framework or guidelines that we could recommend to our government, and also hopefully to see what type of a legal and regulatory framework might be necessary to govern private data in cases of breaches by private entities. And that's kind of the sum of what the intent of the resolution is. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
If I might, if the chair may ask, what's the difference in your original and the substitute? What else did you add to
Yes,
the substitute?
what I've added is, at the request of the Technology Association of Georgia, we wanted to also focus on some of the human resources infrastructure that we have available in Georgia. As you know, if you look on page 2, lines 22 to 31, we use this language that was in the joint resolution that was passed out of the House, but that has stalled, identifying that we have a very, very robust industry in cybersecurity in Georgia, and that we want to take a look at how we could work together with them in offering some guidelines, and also as an economic development tool to see if we could also capitalize on this issue. And so the only additions are 22 to 31.
Very good. Ms. Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Pack, will you be meeting with heads of the Cyber Command Center in Augusta on the federal installation?
If your committee approves it and passes it out of the House, I believe that they should be very important, not only as a resource. Certainly, they're very, very important. And so we will learn about some of the cyber threats, and I intend to meet with them. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Looking through the report, everything seems to be generally what's in order for study committees, 5-day max. appointed by the Speaker. Everything seems to be appropriate. As a footnote to this, I do want to say something in behalf of, a little bit of background. I don't think that we have a member of the House that is probably more qualified to be dealing with this as we do Representative Pack, having worked with the Justice Department in prosecution of terrorists, and I'm sure that went on into the cyber criminals. But thank you for bringing this forward. We have a question, number 15. Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree, and it's very important legislation, one of the greatest strategic risks that we have. The only comment or suggestion that I would have is I noticed a couple minor Scrivener's errors on line 11 to 13, so it would probably make sense to fix those. Measures should probably be measures, and then I'd suggest changing in line 12 best to should, and then balance should probably be the past tense, so it should be balanced against.
Okay. I think that's a very friendly amendment. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Would you go ahead and repeat those one more time?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I would recommend changing in line 11 measures to measures, and in line 12 replacing best with should, and then changing balance to the past tense balanced.
All right.
I serve on the Code Revision Committee, so I appreciate those type of corrections at the committee level.
There's nothing better than having skilled attorneys who are English majors.
Yes, sir.
All right. Very good. We have a motion.
Move to pass.
We have a move do pass. Do we have a second? Second. And we have a second. Now, we have a proposal to amend the substitute as a committee substitute, as a perfected committee substitute with those changes that have been. Abby, do you have that? Julius, do y'all have that? All right, to do this as a more perfected committee substitute, correct?
Yes.
All right. That being said, anyone in disagreement to the amendment to this substitute? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, members of the committee.
All right. Representative Tanner, are you in attendance?
Yes, sir.
Welcome. House Resolution 744.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be as brief as I possibly can on this. Over the past 3 sessions, we've had a lot of bills, or several bills, entered dealing with drones and the law enforcement use of drones. Those pieces of legislation have not been successful in getting through both chambers and passed into law. One of the things that I have noticed, though, over the past several years, and all of us know that technology continues to change in this area, and something that used to be very unheard of is now being purchased by your neighbors and farmers and county governments and law enforcement agencies, and at least one sheriff's office in the state employs drones now to use for law enforcement capacity. So I think it's important, instead of trying to piecemeal a policy over numerous legislative sessions dealing with drones, maybe specifically law enforcement, and then another time maybe we deal with GIS mapping for counties, that we focus on a global approach to a state policy for drone usage in the state. Everything from law enforcement usage for gathering evidence all the way down to private property usage. You know, one of the things I think about at my own home, if my neighbor has a drone and my daughter's in the backyard at the swimming pool, at what point should they not be able to videotape my daughters in the backyard? It's a changing area that we've never had to think about before in the state. And I try to be very measured in my approach to things, and I don't want to try to draft a piece of legislation on my own of something this, I think, important to the state's future policy on drone usage. So I've worked with the Speaker's office, with some members of this committee and others with ideas, and it has been suggested, and I agree, that maybe studying this issue with 7 individuals from the House that the Speaker would deem to have some specific experience or expertise in this area, and bringing back a recommendation to this body next session of what the state's policy should be moving forward be appropriate. Mr. Chairman, I believe that we've used the standard language that the committee would not meet more than 5 days. The members would be appointed by the Speaker. He would appoint the chairman, and then they would submit a report back to the body, and then whatever action the body chose to move forward with next session would be appropriate.
Thank you very much. Any questions from any of the committee members? If there's not, I'd make a suggestion. I noticed it on line 15, you're requesting 7 members instead of the normal 5. I might suggest that you might want to consider 5, since that seems to be the number that we look at in study committees.
That's good, Mr. Chairman.
Would you consider that?
Yes, sir, I would consider
All
that.
other things seem to be the same. 5 generally for a max of 5 days, and the appropriate reports to be filed. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Do we have anyone that would consider putting forth an amendment to change the 7 to 5 members? We have a motion to amend on line 15, the word 7, to change that to 5. Do we have a second to that amendment? We have a second to the amendment. All right, let's go back to the original. Do we have any opposition to that amendment? No amendment. Would you prefer to do that? Would you change that to do this as a committee substitute as amended? All right, we have a committee substitute as amended. Any further amendments? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. Who's this? Thomas Weaver. Senate Bill 176. Senator Jackson has asked that we allow former Senator Brush to present this bill, and this is not a stranger to this committee. This was something similar to what we had seen in Chairman Yates's bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Jackson sends his regards. They're in session. You know, the Senate takes a little longer to do things on that side. They work longer hours, I think, sometimes. They have to talk a lot more.
Let me sort of cut this to the chase, Senator. What we have here is we've got the same bill that this committee heard that deals with motorcycles coming up to the ped strips at red lights, not being heavy enough to change the light. This has been around for about 15 years, and it's been held because, you know, we really have had some problems in law about allowing someone to go right on through on a motorcycle because of the light weight of a motorcycle and the danger of being broadsided. Now this one doesn't have the language on the handlebars that Representative Yates' language had.
No, it didn't. Doesn't have that.
All right, I have asked in speaking with Senator Jackson, one of the things that we had concerns about was the insurance, what the insurance industry, how they would view that. And I see someone here from the insurance industry, and I'm going to ask him if he'd come up and give his take on it. after some discussion I'd had with the senator. If you would just keep your seat, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Joey.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Bobby Potter, and I represent State Farm Insurance Company, which is about 25% of the automobile policyholders in the state, and the American Insurance Association, which has a broad array of property and casualty insurance interests as well. I had spoken to the subcommittee relative to the House bill when it was in subcommittee, and I would restate some of those concerns from the standpoint of the insurance industry. And I've spoken with Joey Brush, so this is no surprise. But from the standpoint of the insurance industry, well, from the standpoint of my clients anyway, I would say we have safety concerns associated with this bill. And from an insurance rate standpoint, I was asked that question here last week with a State Farm executive standing next to me. So when the question was asked, I just looked at him and said, so would this have an impact? And his answer was that it would, because it would. It has the propensity to increase accidents, and if there's an accident involving a vehicle and a motorcycle, more often than not, the motorcycle is going to lose, and the accident can be significant. So our concerns are twofold from a safety standpoint as well as that possibility or probability of increasing rates. From the safety standpoint, I just view this from the perspective of a driver moving at whatever the correct speed or possibly slightly in excess, but even at the correct speed, looking at a green light. And I'm thinking not just, but in terms of the top end of 400 or the top end of 365, where there's just no expectation that there would be a vehicle, motorcycle, or otherwise essentially running a red light. That just is fraught with peril and causes significant concerns from our perspective. So that's the concerns that I would express to this committee relative to this bill. And I'd express those concerns to Representative Yates, who had sponsored a similar bill on the House side.
How many copies do we have? Excuse me, do we have any questions from any of the committee members? Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just maybe to the Senator Brush or Mr. Potter, in a situation, I did have a question. In a situation where you have a cyclist make a left turn, the unfortunate circumstance where there is an accident, who is considered the tortfeasor in that particular accident? Is the at fault, does that automatically default to the cyclist if it is a left turn, or is there any fault to the oncoming driver?
Are you talking about if this bill passed and the light was red?
Exactly.
No.
I don't have and let me preface it. My family rides, so I don't have I actually would probably support the bill. I do have a question of concern. My concern would be wondering about the oncoming driver in a vehicle,
Right.
maybe not aware of the law, but yet passing through a green light, and that cyclist has made the left-hand turn.
Right.
Is there any fault on their part if they're indeed traveling through a green light?
No. In fact, this bill doesn't change the right-of-way. We're not even asking for the right-of-way on this. If in this case the motorcycle would not have the right-of-way, just like if you turned right on red.
Okay.
The motorcycle would not have the right-of-way at all. In fact, it would be very similar. It'd be the same situation if you had a T intersection and the secondary road was a stop sign. You would have the same thing there, that the car would not have any expectation, may not even know the road is there. And we're faced with that every day.
Okay.
You know, Mr. Potter is concerned about money. I'm concerned about my life. I guarantee you I'm more concerned than he is.
And I get, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure, go right ahead.
And I understand both. Mr. Potter, if you want to reply to that as well.
I'd be happy to respond to that. In the earlier version through the House, there was kind of a statement that the motorcyclist would take the risk, and if an accident, would be responsible. In real life, there's going to be an injury with two vehicles. If there's injuries associated with it, chances are there's going to be a lawsuit, and whether or not and who is responsible is going to be determined at the end of that by a judge and or most often a jury. It's not going to be clear cut when there's a mess of a wreck on the road at that point. At least that would be my take on it.
Would there? Well, I guess what I would not want to see, even it being in the posture, just myself personally, to support the bill. What I wouldn't want to see, though, however, is that a person in a vehicle traveling through a green light have any liability in that instance, if there indeed was an accident and damages were brought. That there would be. I'm not much on immunity, however, but in this situation.
Well, let me. I'm not an attorney, and my father is thankful for that. But I would say I can't think of any scenario the automobile rider automobile driver would be liable unless they were violating the law of some sort, another law, and
which should be reflected in the accident report.
Absolutely.
Or may.
It may be. It may not be. At that point, if there is an accident, it could be a mess. And I suspect there's nobody raising their hand to say, I took a left here because the law allows me to do that at this point. The other concern that I would raise, just as a thought, is take an accident out of it. And honestly, I know Mr. Brush has indicated I was only worried about money, which I would say is simply not the case. But there are concerns associated with this bill. And another I would raise from, and maybe they have spoken this and I don't know it, but from a policeman perspective or highway patrol perspective, if they see a vehicle making a left turn on a red light, chances are they would stop that vehicle and ought to and issue a citation. If this bill passes, there would need to be significant education about it across the board, which is somewhat problematic. Then from the standpoint of the driver that has the green light, and I suspect this legislature is not going to be, as part of the transportation bill or otherwise, putting up signage that says, beware, somebody could make a left turn on a red light. There's just, I recognize there are concerns with motorcyclists that reach that red light, but I'd respectfully submit the answer is probably not to pass through the light or make a left turn like this.
Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Potter, has similar legislation, do you have information where similar legislation has been passed in other states and there's been a significant impact on safety? Is there any data like that from Senator Brush as well?
I do not have any data. I think some of it may be available. I didn't bring any with me.
The latest I have, 19 states have passed similar legislation to this. I don't know of anything. I don't know of any change in the safety, because let me make this point. This is not a matter of whether the motorcyclist is going to go through the light. This is a matter of whether he's going to get a ticket or not.
Right.
They're not going to sit there in perpetuity. I can tell you that. This happens hundreds of times every day in the state of Georgia, and they are going through the lights.
I see some hands waving. Bobby, thank you. Could you stay with us as long as you can? I see a couple of hands waving. Gentlemen, would y'all like to come up?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, Mr. Chairman. one of the things that's been mentioned in this and previous committees that hasn't come up here, this is primarily a problem that happens at off hours. If there's heavy traffic, this is primarily a left turn lane issue. At the off hours, most of the intersections are programmed to switch between the main thoroughfares. This is primarily something that happens at empty intersections, when there isn't any other traffic in the left turn lane to trip the magnetic induction loops. As such, some of these scenarios that people have been pointing out taking left turns in heavy traffic aren't going to happen because there's going to be other vehicles in that left turn lane. This is something that happens at off hours when there is no other traffic to set that light. And I have sat at some of these lights for 4 and 5 cycles before somebody pulls up behind me, and I finally decided to just go ahead and run the light because there was no other traffic unless I was going to wait there until dawn. Now, these lights work for every other road user, but not for motorcyclists. We need to have a legal way forward to proceed through that intersection. One of the ones I get trapped at the very most is the left turn going south toward I-85 at Claremont Road, taking the turn on to I-85 north. You can sit there all night on any motorcycle. And there is no traffic hitting I-85 north after about 11 o'clock at night. You can sit there all evening if you want to obey the law. You're not going to have traffic until dawn. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another hand back here.
Thank you, Chairman Powell. My name is Brad Colston. I'm a Georgia motorcyclist, and I have done the research on the bill. The last time the insurance representative spoke, I was a little bit unprepared, and I apologize to the subcommittee. I said that there were 28 states that had current legislation. There are 19. I've researched 12 of them. And none of them, through Freedom of Information, were able to offer a single accident related to the use and exercise of this law. The law does vary between reasonable time and 3 minutes. North Carolina has a 3-minute maximum. That's code NCGS 20-158. Tennessee has proceed with due caution. That's their code 55-8-110, 86. And the next state here is South Carolina. They took our bill from 2007 and incorporated it into law. It's a 120-second delay. They have been able to report no accidents, incidents associated with exercise of that law. It's South Carolina Code 56-5-970, parentheses 5. I do have a total of 12 states that I was able to contact in the time since the last subcommittee meeting, and as I said, none of them were able to provide me with any information regarding a citation issued, or an accident regarding use of that law. So while I understand the insurance representative's perspective, as Mr. Alsbach just said, this law really only applies in zero traffic situations. If I'm not familiar with the top of Georgia 400 or 365, as he said, but if it is such a case where the side street is not visible because you're climbing a hill, the light's going to be an automatic cycle when it's dark. So you're going to see headlights approaching, or the illumination of headlights, and you're going to make a judgment call as to whether you have time to proceed or not. As Joey said, we are very concerned about staying alive while we're riding a motorcycle. This is paramount to our enjoyment. So I would beg the committee to consider joining with these other 19 states. The economic impact of motorcycling nationwide is $22.8 billion. Here in Georgia, we have over 200,000 registered motorcyclists. Their average demographic family median income is $68,000. Nationwide, it's $61,000. Not to make too many assumptions, but generally speaking, people of such economic status would be able to make a decision whether it would be safe to proceed. They would exercise. I would think they would have enough common sense to do so. Also, as in House Bill 166, the inclusion of the handlebar repeal. It's Georgia Code 40-6-314. If you could incorporate into Senate Bill 76, Section 3 of House Bill 166, I'm looking at LC 0479S. If you could incorporate Section 3, lines 42 through 52. I heard no objection from anyone regarding repeal of this law. I do have 22 individuals that have been cited for handlebar violations. They've all been cited by a single officer in a single county. It is being used as a profiling tool. There are many people riding motorcycles that have handlebars that are in excess of the height violation, and they are not being stopped. All 22 of these individuals fit a certain look, and I can provide you with that data if it's necessary. But as I said, there was no, since the handlebar height has no basis in science, so there is no reason for it to be there other than its incorporation back when it was used to pull over a certain type of person. So I would beg the committee to incorporate that into Senate Bill 76 and go forward.
Very good. Could you hold? Senator Brush, you had mentioned that the handlebar language that was in 166. Did you bring copies of that with you for the committee members today?
Yes, sir.
If you want that to be.
Yes, sir, I have that.
You have several copies?
No, I have one copy, I think. But, I think I gave it to Brad.
I have it right here.
Okay, we're going to have a little bit more discussion. Misty, would you,
Okay.
but just for the purpose of the committee, could you go get copies of that? You get copies of that, and do we have any member wish to ask a question to this gentleman? All right. Ms. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is for you and the fellow that was with you. If you want to come back up, so I think, because I'd love to hear both your answers. When, I guess, are you good with knowing that I pretty much feel confident that insurance rates will go up for motorcycle riders if we pass this bill? Do y'all feel good with that?
I did a little bit of research on that. I apologize for not referencing or speaking to it. I contacted Progressive Insurance, my current insurer, and I gave them my old address in South Carolina, proper address, zip code, and my rates are virtually the same.
We're different states and all, but I want you to look at the concept. Did you feel there is a testimony by insurance that historically will go up?
Historically, I spent 10 years as one of Joey's predecessors as the ABATE lobbyist, and we've had a couple of insurance companies who have raised a couple of concerns on a few things, and that specifically one insurance company that has. And one of the conversations I had with them years ago was motorcycles are transportation. They know we cross state lines all the time. That's part of riding a motorcycle. Different states have different laws, and that's factored into the equation long before this legislation hits the books.
Okay. But I feel so the rates will be based on what the law is in Georgia. Why, when you sat there through the cycle, I sat through a traffic light the other day, and since this has been on my mind, I think about it a lot. And I sat there in my four-wheel drive truck, for about 3 minutes, and it finally turned, and I thought about you sitting there too, but what's the aversion? I think there's a solution to take. I guess the common sense thing for me is I rode a motorcycle as a youth, but taking a right-hand turn, going 275 feet or whatever it is, make a U-turn, and I'm on my way.
The intersection that I was specifically citing at I-85 and Claremont Road actually doesn't permit that, because to the right is actually the on-ramp where they have the side lanes that go to the interstate. There's a lot of intersections.
I'm talking about out in the middle of the road, out in Pickens County, and there's a red light that sits there for 4 minutes.
When you get to the rural areas, it's not as big of an issue, especially if they don't have left turn lanes that use the magnetic induction loops. It's specifically the left turn lanes that use the magnetic induction loops that are the problem. When you get to rural areas, a lot of them actually program in that left turn. It seems to be in the metro Atlanta area that we have the biggest problem with this, because if there isn't another piece of metal that's large in that lane, it won't register. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter if it's day or night. During the daytime, when you have larger vehicles around, they register fine. It's when you're sitting there by yourself.
But in the nighttime, at that one left lane, can you not there's nobody there, you're saying, can you not take that right turn, go up through there and turn, and you're on your way? I don't see the practical application. One of the difficulties, solution simple.
One of the difficulties is that you can't always take a right turn at those intersections, like the one at Claremont that I was talking about specifically. The other one that we run into is there aren't a lot of places where you can take a U-turn in a lot of places. So by the time you actually take that right turn across traffic from the left turn lane, go down to the next available driveway in the McDonald's or whatever's there, pull in there and turn around, you've placed yourself at considerably more risk than you would have making sure the coast was clear and taking that left turn. There's no way around this that places you at less risk without a legal way to proceed forward.
I thought about taking the right the other day. That was my
and I've done
solution.
it. And I've done it in some circumstances in the past, but the right turn isn't always there.
Yeah.
That's where you really run into trouble.
And lastly, I'm sorry I didn't get to hear all the conversation earlier, but mine is the worry of the potential creation of conflict with law enforcement, and that you just made a statement about a guy at the handlebar picking on folks in an area, and it seems to me like this would create a whole new thing where I'm saying if I'm the motorcycle rider and make the left turn on red, I'm coming around the corner as law enforcement, I see you do it, I'm going to write you a ticket, and I've got an argument on the side of the road. And I sit there for 4 minutes. Here we go. I know that you're going to lose that argument, but it seems like we're just creating an argument zone.
In general, after they pass legislation like this, the next year, they actually train their officers on what's been changed in the laws. They usually go over them pretty carefully, as far as I can tell.
I'm sure they do.
They really do, because they usually know when they see it coming what's going on, and they'll ask when they pull up to you. I actually had that happen in one of the states up north where they have the turn law. Mm-hmm. I went through it, and he pulled up just as I was doing so, and he was curious. He said, "Did you sit through a cycle?" "Yes, I did." "Thank you, Kylie. Have a nice day." So it does happen on occasion that they could catch a view just as you're doing that. It's not that uncommon. But the reality is, like I said, this is usually at empty intersections. So when they roll up on one, they see a motorcycle going through a red light, they know those intersections don't work.
Yes, sir.
Because they've been around working that patrol area for a long time. They know what light works and what one doesn't. And within their beat, they usually know which ones do and don't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I was looking for is someone from public safety or the police from our local governments, if they are here to speak to this.
I think we have the nearest thing is sitting right there.
One quick comment that I did want to add.
The Governor's Office of Highway Safety.
One quick comment that we did want to add. It was specifically our intent to make this something that you can't get a citation for. We had no intention of deeding the right-of-way to the motorcyclist taking that left turn.
Thanks, Buck. So, dear friend.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We do have some concerns about this. I sympathize with the need, but as was referenced earlier, there are some places in this state where the speed limit at a traffic light is 65 miles an hour. On the upper end of 365 is what's referenced, the upper end of 400. What concerns me is going from 0 into that, and a car's coming the other direction at 70 plus 75 miles an hour and 80 miles an hour. That's our biggest concern. We understand in the cities and so forth that just makes some sense there, but when you're crossing those, there is some concern there.
You have any solutions? Excuse me, you have any solutions?
No, sir. I don't have an answer. And again, we've talked about this, and there are a lot of things we're in agreement on. This is just one of those things. In those rare occasions, that's one of the things we disagree on.
Would you be of the same mind that I am that there seems to be a problem that exists?
Yes, sir.
That technology has not yet caught up with how to change the weight?
I agree with you 100% on that, sir.
And do we also agree that these motorcycles can't just sit there in perpetuity without violating the law in some shape, form, or fashion?
I do agree with you. You know, the one thing that concerns me, and this is as we look at, we are now on the verge of 9 straight years of reduced fatalities in this state. The one place that has not gone down or has continued to inch up is in motorcycle fatalities, and anything we can do that saves lives, that's our number one goal. I sympathize with these folks, but I have a concern about somebody going out to an intersection where the speed limit is 65 miles an hour, going from 0.
Any questions?
Can I comment on that, Mr. Chairman?
Well, let me get the.
Okay.
I have a committee member's got a question down there.
I would just like to
Mark.
also ask, would you also admit that motorcyclists are already doing this
Absolutely.
out on the roads?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I mean, we're not changing the practice. We're just talking about they're going to continue to do what they're already doing. We're just not going to cite them for it. Correct. Decriminalizing the act that they're already doing.
It's hard to write a citation to someone who is no longer with us.
But they're already doing it.
Sure.
So, I mean, and in that case, you would already still cite them for insurance purposes when it would go to, if it was a fatality, they would still get the ticket write-up, or not the ticket, but the write-up for the insurance purposes would cite the person driving the motorcycle as the at-fault driver so that the insurance companies can handle it and repair all the liabilities.
You're correct.
Okay.
Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that line of questioning. In terms of, you mentioned that we have motorcycle fatalities. If I were just to guess, I haven't researched it, I would guess that a lot of that is because of speeding and everything else, not this situation.
There's any number of reasons.
Do you have any of this situation that you can point to?
Not right in front of me.
Okay. Because just listening through the various testimony, it seems that the situation that we're presented with is one where people are acting with due care. And I agree with you in terms of the speeding issue is the only one to answer a little bit more Representative Gravely's question in terms of the potential liability for somebody going through a green light. The only one that I can even conjure up would be if the person going through the green light were speeding, and maybe speeding at a very excessive rate. But absent that, there really shouldn't be any issues here. So I support the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
I think you have one more question. Mr. Petrie.
Yes, Mr. Holcomb, Representative Holcomb just touched on it to some degree. I was just going to ask, I mean, we're talking about trying to avoid the citation is really the goal here. And we've got 2 state patrolmen on this committee. Are they really writing tickets if somebody is using due care and you're at a light and you have to you have to turn left? Are law enforcement officers across the state really writing tickets in circumstances like that?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
It just seems to me that a reasonable person would not. But,
even in my circle sphere of influence, I have one of the reasons I got involved in this. I have friends who are law enforcement officers that ride a motorcycle to work different shifts. One is an ambulance driver, EMT. If they get one ticket, they lose their job. They lose their job. And the situation Mr. Harris brings out, 65 miles an hour, I understand that. But I'm telling you, what is legal now on a 65-mile-an-hour highway, you make a right turn, pull on the shoulder of the road, and make a U-turn, which is all perfectly legal, is far more dangerous than what we're asking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
Thank you, sir.
He's not here to speak on this particular issue, but we have someone from DOT here. Josh, would you come on up here for a second? I'm fixing to ask you a question, and you may not have any knowledge about this. Could you tell us a little bit about the technology about these strips that change these lights? What's supposed to be the cycle of change, even if nobody steps on one of these strips? Would you know any of those answers?
Well, I'm not the expert in terms of I'm not an expert on the technology, but the way I understand it, the key component it's not about the weight, it's about the amount of metal to trip the system. It's basically it's not a weight based, it is a mass of metal. You're basically completing a circuit, and by completing the circuit you trip the change in the light.
So if there's no metal or whatever, then it's
the limited amount. That's the technology issue which you identified, Mr. Chairman, as an issue. I did actually sign up to speak
Yeah, but you're speaking on another issue.
I'll speak on this issue.
On this issue?
Mm-hmm.
About the motorcycles?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought you was here to speak on a possible amendment coming out of Clark County.
No, I wasn't speaking on that. Maybe I.
Oh, well, then I'm sorry. Then you go right ahead then.
Oh, sorry about that. Because I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, you have a document that's an analysis, it should be 4 pages, that our traffic operations office put together, and it deals with some of the concerns of the physics of it and stopping sight distance. Just to give you some concept, I think the underlying bill provides for, obviously it defines reasonable care, and then it talks about a 500-foot sight distance, but then just we wanted to provide you sort of what are the minimum, when you're talking about sight distance and being able to stop. So you're that driver who's approaching that intersection, you're seeing something you don't expect, a motorcycle, or in this case of the underlying bill, a bicyclist comes into the intersection, how long do you need to be able to stop and react? And it shows you on page 2, depending on the speed of the vehicle, how much sight distance you would need to be able to stop. And also it adjusts it based on the degree of the road, whether, what is the decline. Page 3, again, just sort of highlights the distinction between, if you're doing a left, if someone's making a left turn, obviously the sight distance has to be greater because for them to be able to clear, because they are proceeding more slowly because they're making a turn as opposed to just gunning it through the intersection. And so we just wanted to highlight this as a concern, express the department's concern from a traffic operations standpoint. There's no magic answer yet about technology. Even if the technology existed, how would you retrofit every intersection in the state, not just state routes, but local routes? I mean, it's a big question. And you're trying to find what's the right answer here. From us, we're trying to address the physics of the situation. When you do have these vehicles, they are approaching, just being able to stop in time, and what is sort of the, I guess one line of theory is if they know there's a possibility of citation, they're going to be very careful. Like the former senator said, they're going to go anyways. I imagine that before they go, they're looking very close to make sure there's not a police officer. At the same time they're trying to make sure there's not a police officer, they're also doubly ensuring that there's no oncoming traffic. So that may be an additional precaution to help make sure that they proceed carefully through the intersection, even if they're doing so illegally. You now remove that impediment to say, I know there are circumstances under which I can go through a red light without being cited. So maybe they are going to show less care, and maybe they don't catch that vehicle that's 500 feet away. So that's all I have.
So DOT also recognizes there's a problem that exists.
Absolutely. And
the DOT also recognizes there's not an answer to it.
Currently there's not.
Hold on, let's see, we have a question. Ms. Frazier.
I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm understanding now that when a motorcycle comes up to a light, it's really not the weight of the motorcycle, it's about the metal.
Correct.
What?
You're completing the mass of the metal. How much metal do you have there? You're basically completing a circuit. And then you're triggering the light. I mean, it's a nuanced aspect of it. They kind of go a little bit hand in hand, but it more has to do with the amount of metal.
The metal that's on the motorcycle.
Correct.
And so I just sat here and found a solution to this. Mr. Chairman.
We're holding our breath.
So I'm just saying, since we're trying to find a way where these motorcycles, because I've seen them go through the light, so I know they do, but they are very cautious. They look around because they're on a motorcycle, and they know their chances are 1 to 10 whether they can survive a hit. So, but I'm saying technology-wise, are we looking at something later on to maybe put in the helmets or something to trigger these lights or something?
To be honest with you, I'm not an expert on the technology. I just know the dynamic of why it doesn't work currently. And if you were to identify, let's say it's an intersection hardware as opposed to something that the might be on the motorcycle or the driver, you'd have to retrofit every intersection in the state with that.
That's right, Senator Brush. So we need to look into that.
Well, a lot of the newer ones are camera triggered.
Right.
And they function all right for the motorcycle. But it's going to take a long time to retrofit all the older type traffic lights in the state.
All right. Well, I had the solution. I'm going to introduce that next.
Bigger motorcycle.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, let's put it in the
All right. And I presume, I'm sorry, Ms. Frazier, but I presume you had the answer to this, and that was put sensors in the helmets at some point. All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This chart is helpful. I have just a quick question in terms of the analysis that you did on the physics. If car A or vehicle A is the car and then vehicle B is the motorcycle, did you take into account that the motorcycle is moving too, so it's not just a static option? And does that
I did not
factor
actually,
into the
our
variables?
office did that. I believe that we talked about the circumstances under which they were evaluating it, so I believe it's tied to the analysis of this bill.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions of Josh?
Thank you very much.
You might want to stay around because we've got there's an amendment to this that DOT drafted a bill for another situation that exists in Clark County.
Okay.
And you may know about that.
I'll be happy to stick around.
Cool. Anyone else wishing to speak on this issue? Yes, sir.
Brad Colston again, and it was just regarding the inductive loop technology. The representative had mentioned that sometimes in his four-wheel drive truck, the traffic light would not recognize his presence for an amount of time. And this is what I've got from the engineers. The inductive loop technology that's embedded just behind the balk line is sensitivity set for either a horizontal or vertical mass. So if I call up the DOT, which I have their numbers, if I call them up and say this traffic light doesn't recognize me, they go out and adjust it so that it will trip to the motorcycle. The next time a truck that's lifted comes up, it won't recognize the truck. So there really isn't a happy medium to it. The problem is not weight. It's the mass. Is the mass vertical or is the mass horizontal? So that's just to clarify that issue.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
And, you know, this simple issue is not so simple, and we just, if we keep on, we're going to figure out how to get ACCG involved in this issue at some point. I know it's Brad. I notice that Todd seems to be salivating because he almost hates that he can't testify on this for some reason. But all right, I got a suggestion that I want to make, and I think we need to take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to come back. But I'm going to give the members something to think about. You know, we have a problem, and there's a problem that exists out there. We have motorcyclists that are coming up, and they're breaking the law because they're not going to sit there forever. If they run out of gas, then they got to have somebody, then they'll probably be cited because they blocked the highway. So we've got a problem. There doesn't seem to be any simple solution to this out of the realms of what's normal. And that's going to be up to the will of the committee what y'all want to do with this. There's language before you. If you decide to go with that language, I do think there needs to be some language put in there about a liability for a vehicle that might strike a motorcycle that if we legally allow it to run a red light because of this type of a situation. I want y'all to be thinking about that. Secondly, we got two other sections I want. One is that Senator, Senator Joey Brush brought up about the handlebar issue that was in the Yates bill prior to. I think that is something that needs to be looked at and that we need to consider that. And then thirdly, there's an issue that we have a bill. I'll pass out copies of this bill. Is Mr. Holcomb here? Mr. Fry here? Mr. Fry has a situation. He's got a bill that he's brought to me from Clark County. Did not make it through for whatever reason, and DOT had written this bill. If y'all might could pass these copies out. This was House Bill 417 that dealt with a specific problem about pedestrian walkways that would fit into this bill wonderfully. And this might just be the first Christmas tree bill that we're looking at for this year. If y'all could, let's take about...
I was afraid of that, Mr. Chairman.
Let's take about a 5-minute break. And we're going to come back in, and we're going to finish this bill, and we're going to finish the last bill up. Mr. Gravely?
Mr. Chairman, at appropriate time, I'd like to offer an amendment.
Please do.
Is now the appropriate time?
It is the appropriate time.
Yes, sir. Okay, Mr. Chairman, on the bill, on the front page of it. Thank you. On line 35, we will add the language, a driver who acts pursuant to paragraph 2 of this subsection shall maintain the burden of proving that he or she acted in accordance with paragraph 2 of this subsection. Such drivers' calls or proximate cause of an accident while acting in pursuant to paragraph 2 of this subsection shall be prima facie evidence that such driver did not exercise the requisite level of caution, care, or consideration required for compliance with the law. And so on line 35, section 3, or paragraph 3, that will just be moved down and renumbered to 4, and the amendment will serve as the new 3.
That was pretty well a mouthful. I guess we can tell when you get the trial lawyers involved, can't we?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Them big words.
But it's a friendly amendment. It doesn't do anything to harm the bill. Matter of fact, I think it strengthens and clarifies to get the bill moving through. We want to see the bill.
All right, before you make that motion, let me ask y'all if we can sort of simplify this process. You've got Senate Bill 76 in front of you. I would recommend that first we'll need a motion to pass and a second for the bill. Then if you'll make a motion to amend as a committee substitute and add your language if that's agreeable by the committee members. At that point, we have another amendment that someone may wish to amend on the handlebar language that was in 166.
Yes, sir.
That you have in front of you. And then if it's the will of the committee, we have another amendment on the pedestrian language by Athens, Clark County, if that is all permissible. And we'll bundle it all up as a committee substitute. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to pass.
All right. Do we have a second? Second. Do we have an amendment to the bill?
Yes, sir, we do.
All right. Make your motion. And if anyone needs him to read it again, that's a mouthful.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Make a motion to amend the bill with the substitute as the substitute as amended,
which will be the proper liability waiver of liability for motorists.
Be an assumption of risk. Yes, sir.
There you go. All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Any questions to that amendment? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Do we have anyone that's willing to make a second amendment? Please.
I'll make a motion.
Let's wait till the last one on this. Does everybody have the language on the handlebar language?
Can I say something real quick, Mr. Chairman, for all the committee? There are at least 4 stock motorcycles that are sold in Georgia that do not meet this 15 inches right now, and the dealers are very concerned about that, and the manufacturers. It's really just an outdated law that needs to be changed. Thank you. I request that. Thank you, sir.
Do we have copies of this in front of y'all? Yes, sir. He's just striking the lines. All right. Anyone wish to make that amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
I move.
All right. We have a motion. Second. We have a second. And that's to add this and let Julius add that at the proper place in this bill to strike that line on the handlebar language. Any further questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have that, and that'll be added into it. All right, next. Mr. Fry, would you like to come forward and talk about your possible amendment if the will of the committee wants to add that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. This is basically a pedestrian safety bill. Currently, as the crosswalk law is written, the pedestrian has to step out into the roadway for a vehicle to stop. We have about 35,000 18 to 22-year-olds in Athens, Clarke County, and like our old chief of police said, we teach those kids how to drive. We teach the rest of the state of Georgia how to drive there. As a safety measure, the county has started putting lighted crosswalks, beacons that will cross the walk and also that flash on either side of the road, and they're button activated. And that's never been recognized in our code before. And basically this just recognizes that the vehicles have to stop at a lighted crosswalk in the code.
All right.
And I'll take any questions if there are any.
Any questions? All right, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Chairman. Just a question about during the daytime, if you're a motorist and you come up to one of these side crosswalks that's flashing, are the lights very visible during the daytime that the motorist would be properly alerted to stop?
Yes, sir. They're extremely visible. I mean, there's not necessarily, it doesn't address their visibility, but there seems to be a GDOT standard. We consulted with GDOT about this, spoken to Josh. The Legislative Council spoke with them about how this needed to be recognized, and I stop at them all the time. I can see them a mile away.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this something that is unique to Athens, Clarke County, or is this being done in other communities?
Yes, ma'am. I've seen them in other communities. I could not figure out a way to get a good count of how many of these crosswalks are around. Mostly in higher populated areas. Not a whole lot. There's a little added expense to it, but I honestly can't tell you how many other places there are. I've seen them though.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Waller, you want to come up and address this issue? Since I think you were the handy worker of this.
He was a consult on it, yes, sir.
Yeah, we were contacted about, I think the issue is in making sure that you're establishing intent so that the vehicle knows that they need to stop. So I think we were consulted in terms of technology, making sure that it's captured sufficiently in law. They're capturing sufficiently the expression of intent by a potential pedestrian to make sure that the vehicle stops, or if they do not stop, that there's some grounds for citation. So.
All right. Any questions of Mr. Waller? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. What's the will of the committee on this?
Chairman, I'm going to pass this.
All right. We have a motion that we include this language into the bill. Do we have a second? Do we have any discussion, any questions? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. And that is so done.
Thanks,
now,
sir.
This Christmas tree is starting to light up a little bit. All right. We have a motion to pass Senate Bill 76 as a committee substitute. Any further questions from any of the committee members? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. And ayes have it. Very good. Get out of here.
Thanks, sir.
I don't see you anymore, former senator. I just want to see Senator Jackson explain this if it ever gets back to him.
explain it to me now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we have one last bill in front of us. This is, we're back to the original bill that we started with earlier today. Senator Jones, Senate Bill 141. I'm going to recognize Representative Jaspers.
Mr. Chairman, I talked with Senator Jones, and we have agreed to a substitution. So I'd like to make a motion to amend the language of SB 141 by replacing it in full with the language of House Bill 492.
Now, do we all have the copies? That would be LC number, as a committee substitute, LC number 410501S.
Yes, sir, it is.
Is there any changes to be made in that?
No, it's fine as it is as a sub.
It is. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I think the committee members, are y'all familiar with 490? Y'all from earlier in the session, that was the cleanup language on several of the Second Amendment issues, as well as adding language. Would you like to tell them what the difference is?
The only real difference in this committee is on Section 3. It's on line 39.
Does this even include this stuff?
Yes.
And then, so we took, with the help of Legislative Council, the real basis of Chairman Setzler's work on schools and school codes, and making sure that with House Bill 826 and this addition, by defining a weapon, if you look over, the key word is over on line 77. We describe it's a firearm. So all these other things are going to be back to the purview of the schools, but the firearm is still going to be, as it should be, in section 79, and then down at 83, the violations of that and the punishments are very severe.
So if I'm correct, then this would say this would also take care of a situation, say an 8-10-year-old lad in high school.
Absolutely. That's the difference between ours.
And he's got his tackle box in the back of his pickup truck, and it's got a hunting or a fillet knife in there. Then the school could use discretion and common sense if they have any.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Very well.
That's really the only changes. Then I did make a change at the behest of the GBI. It's on line. It was line 175, but it's just it kind of referred back to a different code section, and we took it out. It's not in your sub because we took it out, and just trying to make this thing work as we continue listening to everybody. It was just a refer back. Other than that, it's the same.
All right. What's the will of the committee? We have a motion over here. Mr.
Yes, sir.
Aspers?
Yes, sir.
We have a motion that we substitute Senate Bill 145 with the language on LC 410501S. And we have a second. Do we have any other discussion, any questions from any of the committee members? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the ayes have it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank y'all. I'm not sure that this committee is going to be meeting anymore this year. I will apologize to y'all because we did not have as busy a year this year as we did last year, but we did have almost as much fun. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting is adjourned.